When the Portuguese decided to give Bombay to the British as a dowry, the Portuguese were being bloody smart. They knew very well that they're giving those parts of Bombay away to the British, which had no commercial value, which were just brackish, swampy.
I think the British would have been much smarter, and
Yes.
they would have known that they're actually taking the better part of the city. Because I think they must have had a vision. They must have known what they want to do with the city. So, for example, what they did was the first thing that they did is they started connecting every island. The minute they started connecting the island, what
commercial
happened
value
is the
improved.
commercial value increased, the architecture changed, and we're looking at though they took it about in 1661 till 1800s they didn't do anything, but once they started connecting it, and we all know it as the Vellard construction, which is the Hornby Vellard construction, and it was actually called Vellado means embankment in Portuguese. And when they started building these embankments, they realized that once they stopped the water from coming into the middle of the islands, they realized that they could also construct on between these islands by actually filling it up. And that's when all the reclamation began. And most of the land in these areas that was between these islands was quite shallow. And once they started filling it up, these sold like hotcakes. A lot of people started buying land in these areas. And then suddenly, at one point of time, when Gamdevi used to be the corner of the city, they realized that up till Mahim now, they could actually construct. So, for example, the island of Mahim was, again, not so popular. It was, once the railway tracks came in, it became popular because you had a lot of Hindu settlements that happened in Mahim because they were all working for the British. So these guys decided to settle in where there was a station, which was the other station. And then you had some development there. But in a sense, the British were throwing off all the industries into Mahim at that point of time.
Yes.
So Mahim was not one of the popular areas, but in effect, all the islands were getting connected. You spoke about Mahim being connected to the Salsette Island. I think the connection of the islands began when Lady Jamshedji saw that there was a big boat that capsized in the area, and then she said that she wanted to connect Mahim with Salsette, and that was the causeway that happened. And then you had the Colaba Causeway that happened in 1838, which connected Colaba to Old Woman's Island, and that's how slowly everything started getting connected in Bombay. The popularity rose of these areas.
In fact, there's a little story I just want to mention. Maybe you know about it, but the Parsis, remember that Koaschi, Chichi, Bhoi were all Parsis.
Yes.
The Parsis were very influential, but the Parsis were not so superstitious as the Hindus and the Muslims were.
Yes.
So when you had the graveyard and the cemetery, just near Churni Road, there, none of the Hindus wanted a house there. The Parsis said, we will build houses there. The Agyari came up there. All the settlements there were Parsis because they did not mind putting up the houses next to the cemetery.
Yes. And it's very interesting that you spoke about the Parsis, because before the Parsis actually moved to, say, Churni Road or to the richer areas now of Bombay, like Kemp's Corner, and even Colaba, Cuff Parade for that matter, they all used to be on the Bora Road, and the Parsi Road of the fort. And there's a lovely story, because we're mentioning Gigi Boy. There's a lovely story where he stayed, and one of the fort walls actually came very close to his house, and then he requested the government, that he paid for it, and he requested the government to kind of move the fort walls a bit because they were coming very close to his house. But the government at no point of time had the authority to tell him to move his house. But they were very keen and they were very willing to move the fort walls for him because of his power and also what he was doing for
the rest of Bombay,
for the rest of the city.
But come back to the architecture of talk about Bandra and Khar. That's something I'm waiting to hear.
Yeah. So what happened is that when so Bandra can't be spoken about it singularly.
Okay.
Because what happened is the main idea of the architecture of the Bombay changed because of the Bombay Improvement Trust. You had the plague that happened in the 1890s, and then the Bombay Improvement Trust was kind of set up. And when the Bombay Improvement Trust was set up, they started building these precincts in the entire city. And that's when they built, they built Shivaji Park, they built Gamdevi. So everywhere that you walk around Bombay, and you'll see areas which are clustered with G+4 buildings is what the Bombay Improvement Trust built for us. And in similar fashion, they also shifted a lot of people into Bandra and Andheri and Khar for that matter. And you had all the rich guys actually moving to the suburbs.
Okay.
At that time, if you realize, Bandra would be all villages at the coast. There would be the Koli villages.
Correct.
And at that time, when the Bombay Improvement Trust was making these upper middle class houses, they situated everyone near the railway station. At that time, the rich was closer to the railways, not near the sea. The sea being near the coast is now a new modern thing. So everyone who could see the railway tracks was rich.
Yes.
At that time.
At that time, that was the view that they wanted.
Yes, and that is how Bandra grew. So if you see, Bandra is clustered, which has really beautiful buildings, which are near the railway stations.
Including the Parsis.
Including all the Parsis.
Yes.
That's right bang next to the railway station. And which is when you know that wealth was near the
Absolutely
near the railway
That's
station.
a good insight. Yes.
You look at the Parsi community, wherever they stay, wherever their bags are, and you know that's where the wealth was, old Bombay. And then you can connect the dots and you would realize how Bombay has actually grown from there. So one part is Bandra, and Bandra has a lot of Art Deco buildings because Bandra was reclaimed or built by the BIT around the same time that Art Deco came to Bombay.
Okay.
But Art Deco is the most popular style in our city.
Okay.
So we all say Art Deco. A lot of historians, a lot of books that I've read will term a building Art Deco because it was in an era of, say, 1920 to 1950. But Bombay has a lot more architecture than that. So if you go to Kemp's Corner, you'll see a lot of Baroque buildings. And why Baroque? Because you had a lot of rich Europeans and rich Parsis building buildings. So they could exaggerate their buildings. And you'll see some really beautiful buildings of Baroque design in Kemp's Corner.
Quite ornate, yes. Very, very.
Yes, very ornate. Similarly, Gamdevi as well. So you will have Art Deco, but you will have a lot of ornate buildings which are Edwardian with a lot of Baroque details at Gamdevi.
Yes.
Then, of course, when you go to Cuff Parade was these lovely, beautiful bungalows when before the BID came in, actually, when they were actually building, when they were reclaiming land. Where they have lovely Baroque bungalows, and unfortunately, we have only 2-3 of them.
2 or 3, yes.
Right now. But even if you look at the buildings of Cuff Parade, and you'd realize that they're again, as you say, very ornate, so very Baroque, very neoclassical. And I always say that though Bombay was built because of these 7 islands, but what really built Bombay was its khichdi architecture. Because there's no particular style, and every time we walk around, I keep telling people that this is Baroque or this is neoclassical. But in a sense, Bombay's architecture has no particular style to it. And that's the beauty of it because, it's a mixture of a lot of different styles that are there.
And what was Salset?
So Salset essentially was Sasashti in Marathi. And that's when the Portuguese couldn't say Salset. So it's a corrupted version of Sasashti because Sasashti means 66 villages in Marathi. And that's why it was called Salset. And I mean, you're more of an authority on that, where we say that Salset was a Portuguese bastion with Bassein as its capital. And, though you said it before as well, but I feel that the Portuguese never built with the intention of actually controlling land. They were more worried about controlling the water. So whatever they built was always because of the seas, and not because of what they wanted on land, and which is why
even the Vasai fort is there right in the midst of water.
Correct. So, for example, all the churches that they built, were all towards the coast. If you see St. Andrew's Church, which is right next to the coast, and there's a myth. They say that the St. Andrew's Church was washed away once, and when they started building it, they built it in the opposite direction. But if you see, all these churches were meant that the altar faces the east. And that is why you would have all these churches that were based near the sea. Even if you look at St. Teresa's Church, which is at Girgaon, at that time, Chowpatty was not Chowpatty. It was only where the land actually divided itself into 4 lanes, which was the sand, which was called Chaar Pattis, and that is why it became Chowpatty. So if you look at St. Teresa's Church as well, which would be the 4th island of the city, was on the tip of that, on the tip of the island.
Interesting.
And it's very easy for us to, kind of see Portuguese architecture, because you realize there's a distinct difference between the British churches and the Portuguese
church.
Most of the Portuguese churches will be white and they'll be plastered. There's no exposed stone, because the Portuguese in their construction always believed that they like to use lime plaster. So they didn't want to expose their stones, and which is why you always had the Portuguese churches which were more calm in their appearance and not as busy as the British churches.
Thanks, Nikhil. This was very useful. I've learned a lot, and so will our viewers. And what we do is, for the next episode, we'll talk about a little more about St. Andrews, because there's a lot of stories that surround St. Andrew. And then after that, we'll also talk about the villages that surround St. Andrews and how these villages created their own distinctive culture.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.